further ado, I'd like to introduce you guys to our speaker this morning. So just on that theme of wonder, when I first met Billy through Peter back there, we just sat down and said, okay, well, actually, what is wonder? So wonder is kind of, a noun in terms of it's an amazement. It's something, that's curious and explorative, but it's also a verb. So like I said, to feel curious about something. So the entire time when Billy was kind of talking to me about his experience from studying law, turned designer, turned writer, and his really super random experiences later on that he'll share, it just felt that there was this repetitive pattern of wonder always following him, and him always kind of unknowingly pursuing his sense of wonder. So everyone, please welcome Billy Potts.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. So basically to me, wonder is very wrapped up in unexpected beauty and encounters with these things which you would never think. So a lot of my work involves Hong Kong. I do a lot of branding work and design work, but in my experiences, I've done so much that I'm quite surprised myself. But essentially, Hong Kong continually surprises me. I've lived here 29 years, and yet it still has something to offer. There's still something to learn, and this inspires me to wonder about it. So growing up, I was always surrounded by art. My mother is a calligrapher, and so it was always about art. But as we know, Hong Kong children do not become artists, they become sensible things like lawyers. So this is a photo of me qualifying as a lawyer, and that is my dad standing next to me. So this is a man who now has a 100% failure rate of producing lawyers because my brother went and did the exact same thing that I did. I was on the very straight and narrow path. I was too anxious, too afraid to do anything else. I didn't know anything better, but the whole time I always wondered what else there might be. I went to university in London, but I feel that my real education was with all the museums and events and little courses I could do there. So I was doing it the whole time, taking sketchbook to museums, learning whatever I could, drawing, and I was very interested in drawing people, to remember them, but also because I was interested in people's stories. And this would become a kind of theme for me. I was just interested in not so much what they look like, but more, what they do and what's going on behind that facade. So my first step into this world was sort of directing this play, and I forced all my flatmates to be in it. And I wrote it, and I didn't know why I was writing it. It was just sort of like an instinct. I just kind of had to do it. I didn't know if it was leading to anything. I don't know what it might lead to. As far as I was concerned, it would probably lead to nothing because I would go on to be a lawyer right afterwards, regardless. But actually what happened was a family friend saw it and said, well, you can write this nonsense, so you can write basically anything. Come work for me. And that is how I ended up working at a lingerie magazine, and it was the most unlikely thing. It was like two grungy boys sitting in a room full of bras and panties, writing stories and also researching how best to fit bras. It was a very unlikely situation, but I was there to write, and the other guy, who was an architect, was there to do the layout and the graphic design. And after a while, sort of like, that looks pretty cool, what you're doing. And so, he started to show me, what he was doing with InDesign and Illustrator. And so I started doing that too, and it became my first design job. And I said to this guy, it's the best when art does useful stuff. I like that. And he was really patient with me, and he said, well, like when art does useful stuff, as you say, that's actually design. And so I thought, yeah, that's pretty cool. And that's when I started to wonder, like, oh, is there a path there? But, you know, without me knowing, I had actually begun wandering off into this direction, this very windy, unpredictable little side route. And this guy that I was working with, he went on to work at PolyU, and he told me to come over and do this program about upcycling. And this is how my life became entwined with taxis. I was fascinated actually by the taxi industry in Hong Kong. And I wanted to see if I could take parts from taxis and turn them into things. So the first thing we did was we were doing furniture. So at this point, this was the level of my ability, like a kind of rough sketch of this chair that we wanted to do, scribbled on the back of a receipt. You know, everybody was very supportive. Like, it's okay, if you don't know how to do anything right now, we'll figure it out. And that's what we made. We went out to Mong Kok, we bought the steel, we bent it, we took it out to Chun Wan, we bought the taxi seat. It cost $50. Actually, the headrest cost more than the seat itself, so I don't know if that's because it's like some kind of luxury item. But like the headrest itself cost $75. Okay. And so, you know, this chair led to many things. This chair got sent to Germany. It was shown all over. And so I just wanted to pursue the story, and I just wondered what was going on behind this industry and the people involved in it. And I came into contact with his family, the Nguyen's, and they run a little upholstery shop in North Point. And generally speaking, like, I'm quite a shy person, so I don't generally approach people. But like in this particular moment, I don't know why, I think I was just spurred on by this sense of wonder. I saw these guys on a Saturday afternoon playing mahjong, and I decided to disturb them and ask if I could perhaps buy the scrap material that they had lying around. And they were very kind, and they said, no, you may not buy it, we will give it to you. And so they for many years, they very kindly supplied me with their trash. And we made these taxi seats into like bags and all sorts of things, watch straps, furniture. And at first I wondered about, will this resonate with people? Why would it? It's just a very generic vinyl. It all comes in one color. It's all dark gray. And plus, to my mind, it had this ugly sort of line pattern. But then all these things actually came together, and it was amazing to see that people could actually recognize the material, because what I learned was, though ubiquitous, everybody has some kind of contact with a taxi. Everybody has a story with it. And so that's when I began to realize there's something very subtle about Hong Kong culture. It's not generally speaking in your face, but if you take the time to really wonder and be curious, it has so much to offer. So I called this company the Handsome Bag Company because I'd been joking around with my mom that, well, in Hong Kong, when you have a company, you take the founder's nickname and you add gay to the end. So my company would be Zun Gay, which literally translates to handsome. And so, yeah, I guess my mom named me that because all moms think their sons are handsome. Which is very sweet of her. And so, like, after perhaps a year of doing this, I was approached by this venerable tailoring company from Hong Kong, Ascot Chang, and they didn't want me to make a product for them. They wanted me to create a brand for them. So, the thing that I really appreciate about Hong Kong industry is that, Hong Kong is just such an unlikely candidate for greatness. Like, if you look back, so few resources, so little space. People really just got by on their ingenuity and resourcefulness and intelligence, and Ascot Chang is one of those. And so the problem here was that they had created a brand like over a long period of time, and they just made amazing shirts. In fact, they say, like, if like, ladies, if you meet a man who wears Ascot Chang shirts, you should marry him. So that's the kind of brand that which you can't contrive. So they had this little company called TCNY, and they could not decide what they wanted to do with it. 1 year it was for kids, 1 year it was for adolescents, 1 year it was for office clothes, 1 year it was sports, just like absolutely did not know what to do with it. And at this point, it was either we close it or we do something with it, we figure it out. So what we did was we did a light rebrand on it, but really the important thing was to reappraise and gain wonder again for what it is that Ascot Chang does best, which is tailoring, tailored suits, and thinking about what is it that people go for about this. So this label was meant to be for much younger men, and they'd be entering the workforce at this point. And there's all these anxieties going in where sort of like, I'm putting my individuality on the shelf now, I'm putting on the suit and I'm going to work. It was certainly something which resonated with me because that's what I felt I was doing going into law. And at this point I was still a lawyer, I was doing this kind of on the side. And so we came up with the concept of the suit is not a uniform, it's actually an expression of your own identity. And so we decided to celebrate it. We made a series of videos. This is with a band called Knots and X's, and we created like a suit for their lead singer, which he was specifically tailored for his performing. He could run his cord through the back of the jacket. There was extra room for him to move around. We also did one for a skateboarder, like a jacket specifically for it with vents so that he could sort of move around with some pads so he could take a bit of a fall. Worked on their shop a bit, but this is when I started getting into a kind of pattern about working with Hong Kong and heritage, which really chimed with my wonder about the place, because I was so tired of hearing people say, oh, it's a cultural wasteland. The thing is, it's only a cultural wasteland if you're not paying attention. So roughly around the same time, I was approached by Detour and Hong Kong Tramways to create a restaurant out of a tram. And so this is where sort of like wonder gets all wrapped up with fear, because there was all this anxiety coming from me, sort of like, should I be doing this? Like, can I legitimately be charging money? Like, to be doing this? Like, I'm literally flying by the seat of my pants, and sometimes I'm just figuring it out. But I did figure it out. So we went from drawing on the back of a receipt to doing this kind of thing. And we'd spent weeks and weeks in this tram depot working with all these wonderful craftsmen. And to me, that was a real eye-opener. I thought it was so wonderful that these men had very little to work with. They had very rudimentary tools. Like, there's no special machinery at all. This, like, the trams that we see on the streets, actually each one is individual. They're all different because each one is made by a different craftsperson, and they rely heavily on the craftspeople's knowledge and skill, which I found so surprising and wonderful, and it was an amazing experience working with them. So this was the first tram that I built. This was designed and built in 3 weeks. And we created it in a modular way because we had so few resources, but this really opened my eyes to what you can do in a very short period of time with very little money. But unfortunately, this restaurant doesn't exist anymore. They dismantled it after 2 weeks. Not before, I know, they stole my design for the table and put it into one of the party trams. Fair enough. But so I was 26 when I did that first tram, and then last year when I was 32, I found it very interesting that they approached me again as the only member from the original tram team still in Hong Kong to work on this new tram called the Circus Tram, and it was almost like coming back to it, like revisiting the same challenge as a slightly older man with like slightly more experience, and it really brought to mind how wonder is wrapped up with fear and is wrapped up with experience, and sometimes that sense of wonder also comes with like pain, like real hurt can happen at the same time too. It doesn't always turn out well, but I realize that's the price of admission. Wonder doesn't often have a safety net, and nor do people always approve. They're not always supportive. People have said all sorts of nasty things about what a stupid decision I made. And yeah, objectively, I'd be much wealthier today had I just stuck to the straight and narrow path, but I think I'd be much less happy. So revisiting the same project again, we sort of approached it in the same way, but more. This is my favorite room in the entire tram. I designed it to look like sort of the Orient Express, but this was on a whole other level. This tram has plumbing, has running water, it has a kitchen, it has a working toilet, it has 3 different rooms. We wanted to create a sense of wonder for people coming in, where every single room would be different as they explored this tram like they were a building. So they'd come into this very mysterious, dimly lit, almost old colonial world gentleman's club, and they would go upstairs to this long room, which is now covered in plants, so it's like a traveling greenhouse or garden. And this line of tables that you see in the middle, this we actually went out to Yuen Long and cut the entire length of a tree in order to create these big planks, and we chose to keep their natural shape so that when you walked in, you would see the silhouette of the tree as it once was, reinforcing the idea that this is a garden. Which brings me to another one of my longest projects. This is ongoing, and it's been going for 6 years. So this is Camel vacuum flasks. I don't know how familiar everyone is with them, but when I came to them, they were at a very strange time in their lives. So these are essentially old school thermos flasks, and they're made in Hong Kong, and they always have been. They were started in 1940, and they made it through economic crises, war, handover, all these things. But by the 1990s, the wonder had kind of gone out of it. It was the second generation running it, and the man Philip Leung, who was doing it, he was just doing it out of sheer tenacity and love for what he did. But unfortunately, they weren't engaging other people. So their old customers would be often surprised that it still existed, and younger people would have no idea that it existed at all. So this is the way they were, and this is another example of just creating something out of absolutely nothing. You can see here on the bottom left, this would have been their accounting department, and you might be able to spot that they're doing the accounts with abacuses. So this is what it came to. The first task that we had to do was we actually had to excavate their old photos from a moldy old mezzanine floor. And we had to steam these photos off the glass because they'd actually fused onto it. And it was in real danger of being lost. There was no copy or anything. It was going to go. Their factory, as you can see the timestamp, made in 1986, it was like time had stood still. When I came to it, this is what it looked like. It had not changed. Through the 90s, it was like it went into cryogenic sleep. But it was still so wonderful. I was just so amazed by the things that they could do in there. And then the third generation came, Raymond, and he was going through a whole thing at that time. He's an architect. He didn't know whether he wanted to come into the family business. He didn't know whether he even wanted to be in Hong Kong. And so I was introduced to him because I was doing all these Hong Kong projects, and they said, you and Raymond will get along. You hang out. And we did hang out for 4 years while he was making up his mind. And then one day I got a phone call from him and he said, hey, I want to talk business. You want to do this? Let's do this. And so that's how I started with Camel. And then the first thing he said is let's rebrand, let's change the logo. I said, no, I do not want to be the man who got rid of the iconic Camel logo. So instead we worked together to create a brand which would work with the old logo but build on it so that they could apply it to their new projects. And I realized it was not rocket science at the time, but actually they just needed to be celebrated, and they just needed a way for people to access them and to talk to them. They did not have a website. They weren't talking about themselves because they were just far too modest. And when I Googled them, there was absolutely no information except for people guessing about what the demise of Camel might have been, breaking into their old factory and doing urbex style photos. Like nobody knew anything about it. Nobody knew that they were still functioning in Kowloon Bay. And then all of a sudden Raymond said, like, okay, let's do this. I'm gonna turn the old factory into a hotel. I'm gonna move the new factory into gonna move into a new factory. Gonna rebrand this thing. Let's do it all now. So I created these posters for them, these new graphics. Just wanted to celebrate them, and like it was not to be not modest, but it was a success. And at this point, like we can't really tell the difference between new products and old products because it's all about respecting and having wonder for what it is and what it was, and bringing out what it truly meant. And then, like, I guess it came to a head last month when we worked with Apple to digitize Camel's old paintings that they used to do on their flasks. So these are made by spray paint, believe it or not, and it takes, like, they've got all these different designs through the years, but they can't do them anymore. It's way too expensive and way too difficult because it takes about 16 layers of these templates. And it takes extremely precise work with a spray gun. Like, you basically have to be like Picasso with a spray gun to do it. In fact, no, you'd have to be Titian with a spray gun to do it, so it's impossible. But when Apple approached us, we thought, why not take these old stencils which haven't been used in decades, let's put them on Illustrator, let's digitize them, and let's give them to people to do whatever they want with them. And so that's what we did with the support of Camel. We made a little workshop and people came together. We worked on Procreate. They took all the various graphics, they mixed them together, did all mashups from all different decades, changed the colors to whatever they wanted. This central image, now I find funny because I was told later that these are actual birds. They're called the golden phoenix. And the male and the female are supposed to look different. Unwittingly, I made this a same-sex couple. But oh well. So finally, like, this all came together when I got a phone call in the middle of the night, and sometimes these things happen. You get random phone calls which are very confusing. It's midnight. At this point, I was writing for various newspapers. And my translator at that newspaper was speaking in very fast Cantonese, and I was just getting like a garbled message like, Australians in Hong Kong want a dragon, there's no dragon there, can you, Yun Long, can you go? Okay, so I went to Yun Long, and then a shady van pulled up, and then some people opened the door and said, get in. So I got in. And we went down some like back alleys and like to this warehouse where this man was killing dragons. So I learned what the story was there is this small city in central Victoria. It's in country Australia. It's called Bendigo, and the funny thing with Bendigo is its most dominant and obvious culture is Chinese, even though it's a very Anglo place. How did this happen? Well, there was a gold rush, and Chinese people love going to look for gold, so they went there. This was at the height of the White Australia policy, so they were, receiving a lot of racism. People would attack them, people would get killed, people were being deported, families were being split apart. So what the Chinese community decided to do was they decided to create a dragon and to bring it and to have it in the Easter parade in Bendigo. To show everybody that they mean well and that they want to do good for the community. They were raising money to build hospitals. And so, as a result, Bendigo now has the oldest dragon in the world. This is the oldest dragon in the world. It's 150 years old. It's from the Qing dynasty. Nobody knows exactly where he was made, but there's no dragon like this anymore. And we certainly don't have them in Hong Kong, because in Hong Kong, the climate is humid. And when they get a little bit ratty, there's a special ceremony where you coil the dragon around, and then you set fire to it. So all our dragons of any age whatsoever have been burnt. They've gone up with smoke. And where can they be found now? They can be found in Bendigo, where they can be found all across the Chinese diaspora, in Canada, in the UK, America. but this is the oldest one and the most. And so what I learned was, since China had repressed this culture during the Cultural Revolution, they lost it. And the only place that it really exists now is Hong Kong, and where all these masters sort of fled to our tiny island city, and they started to flourish because they were all together, they were all learning from each other, and they all had the best materials because we were a port city and relatively wealthy. So the art just elevated to this new level, and even today there's no place like Hong Kong in terms of making dragons and lions. So this dragon is called Sunlong, and he was made in Wan Chai in 1970, and so now he is literally a museum piece. He lives in the museum in Bendigo, which is the largest collection of Chinese folk art in the world, but he's too old to come out now. Now, these dragons are a real economic driver for this city. Their population is only 100,000, but this past Easter it swelled 8 times because everybody wanted to come see these dragons. So as you can appreciate, it's quite an economic boon. If you don't book 6 months ahead, you're not going to get a hotel in Bendigo, you're not going to be able to rent a car, you're not going to be anywhere near the city. It's huge. They spent over $1 million Hong Kong dollars buying that dragon, Dai Gumlong, and he was made in Shao Kei Wan. And I followed this entire process, so now this dragon, Dai Gumlong, is now the longest dragon in the world. Previously, the longest dragon in the world was that other one, Sunlong. So now Bendigo has the oldest dragon in the world, the longest dragon in the world, the second longest dragon in the world. But I have to say that it's not about length. The real remarkable thing about this is the scales. If we want to talk about length, there's a dragon in China made of fabric which is 4 kilometers long. But to me, 4 kilometers is kind of whatever. And you'll see in a second why. This dragon is 125 meters long, so he is the longest imperial-style dragon in the world. And what makes an imperial dragon is each of these individual scales. And they're made like this by a guy like this in Shao Kei Wan. In a tiny 300 square foot shop in Shao Kei Wan, a 125 meter dragon sprang forth. And these things, each one takes about an hour to make, and there's 7,000 of them. Each one involves cutting this paper, sewing this fabric perfectly, cutting rabbit fur to trim it perfectly, and putting all these mirrors and little brass items on it. And it's so hard on the fingers. This man actually had to be hospitalized halfway through the process, and the 12 members of their family and their lion team spent the entire year making all of these scales from scratch. So that's the real art. And so this is their shop, this is what it looks like. This is the dragon as it was when it was just being made. And I thought it was so wondrous that this amazing, transcendent thing was being made in such humble premises. And as you can see, we're going from shirtless to winter clothes. So this is a whole year's endeavor. This is basically the only thing that these guys worked on. And this young man is actually the dragon maker's nephew, so he will be the future of Hong Kong's dragon making, which I think is remarkable. And this is the dragon maker's father attaching each individual scale to the dragon's body. That's probably 100-odd scales right there, and at this point he will have had a lot more work to do. And this is the dragon maker himself, and this is the dragon as he looks now, right before they flew him off to Bendigo. And they also needed to charter a special plane for him because he was too big for the plane which they had intended. But along the way, it wasn't just these dragon makers that I was introduced to. I was also thrown into this whole culture, which, obviously I know what lion dances are, I know what shillings are, I grew up in Hong Kong, but I didn't know what fine art it was, and I didn't know about all the martial arts that goes into it, and all the fine, work and painting and like all this stuff. So this man lives on Ping Chao. His name is Master Leung. He specializes in making qilins, but he also makes dragons. And I'd say that he's the world authority on melding technology with ancient art. So his dragons have milled aluminium skeletons, and the poles are carbon fiber. So like this guy is just like totally into basically making cyborg dragons. And not only did I meet him, I met this guy, Master Yu, who runs a funeral paper goods shop in Hong Kong. But at night he just closes the shop and he makes lions. And he's really famous for painting them. The way he paints these lions, they actually look like they're alive and flowing. And he's extremely temperamental. He'll only make a lion for you if he feels like it. He'll also pay through the nose for it, 25,000 at minimum. And in 2016, he decided he would make 0 lions. So if you can get a lion from this guy, you should consider yourself lucky. Also get your wallet out. And I'd be discovering things that I didn't even know as a Hong Konger growing up here. Like many people, of course, probably know what this is, but I didn't. And this is what you call a peiyao. And the special thing about this, and what I didn't know, is that there's an animal which specializes in murdering people, but also in eating gold, money, and jewels, and never shitting it out, because he doesn't have an anus. And that's a specialty. And then he fell into steep decline in the 90s because lion dancing was more lucrative, and these were seen as quite shady because what kinds of industries like taking your money and never giving it back? Casinos, mahjong halls, and banks. And so you can see that this guy, Master Ho, who was making these, like, he actually likes it, even though everybody sort of like dismisses making these because they're quite simple constructions. But as is quite often the case, when something is simple, it's harder to perfect it, and he has perfected it. And he's also very playful. This guy is crazy. He likes melding old 1950s styles of lions with manga and anime. And he also likes doing playful things, like on this peiyao, if you can see, like he's painted dice, mahjong tiles, and dominoes, and playing cards on it. Just to denote, like that's what these guys are for. These guys are for taking your money. Like if you ever go to Macau, you ever go into a casino, one of these guys is suppressing your luck in favor of the casino. And so, like, really, like, I thought that I was getting way into this until I was actually brought to Bendigo, and I saw this for the first time. I saw Dai Gamlung for the first time. I saw all the people, and really it was the people which transported me. Like, I could not believe that somebody else had seen the wonder in Hong Kong's culture, and it was predominantly Hong Kong culture because Hong Kong is what was making all these things. And you can see, like, there are people from all over the place, but they're so serious about it, they know everything about it, they're deeply, deeply committed. And I'd been told all my life, A, that either Hong Kong had no real culture, or B, that even if it did, couldn't be translated elsewhere. But this entire city is living proof that it can. And like, the love for it was just transporting. I was actually moved to tears seeing it, and I wasn't the only one. And this is probably the first and last time that we'll see anything like this. All 4 of Bendigo's major dragons together, these 3 dragons came out to meet this new dragon, to show him his new home, and to show him around the streets of Bendigo. And I'm getting emotional even now, talking about it, because it was such a moving experience. And all this was from stepping into a shady van. You gotta follow your wonder, right? I mean, and 3 out of these 4 dragons are from Hong Kong. Like, it was just such a source of pride and awe to see them together. Like the lady over there with the wonderful jacket, which was embroidered also in Hong Kong. Her name is Lita Jack. she wasn't director of the museum, and she was in charge of getting this dragon made. Her father was her father ran the museum before she did, and in charge of all this other dragon stuff. But like, it was just a transporting experience. Like a woman who saw that dragon at the end, who's a lantern dragon, and who never comes out, she actually broke down in tears when she saw this dragon, and she's not ethnically Chinese. And that was the thing about it. Like, there are all these people, and this is not their native culture, and yet they fall so deeply in love with it. This lady is Kirsty Jones. She spends all her time restoring the dragons and caring for them. And incidentally, she, with another lady, was the first woman ever to carry the dragons, because the tradition was that only men could carry the dragons until this year, when they campaigned hard, and now it's an equal opportunities dragon, as Kirsty put it, it's the people's dragon. And it's just so wonderful to see, and to see like how this place, this completely unexpected place, has adopted the culture and built on it even, because like, as you know, with Australians, what are they going to do when you give them like something to work with, like lion dancing? Well, for one thing, they're going to make it a hell of a lot more athletic, and they're going to make it so that there's a lot more jumping and like acrobatics. Like, it's just amazing. These people are so fit. But I guess that's what you get in Australia. And so, yeah, I mean, I leave you with these parting remarks. I mean, there's no telling what will happen when you follow your wonder, and when you're curious about things, and you engage in that thing which you always were curious about, on the edge of your experience or on the edge of your knowledge. If you would just acknowledge that from time to time and engage it, there's no telling what it will lead to, where you will end up. You might end up in an Australian country town where everybody loves being Chinese or taking part in Chinese culture. So yeah, as my parting remark, I would encourage you to, when your metaphorical, shady, unmarked van arrives, you should get in. Thank you.
What a mind-blowing experience. When you first told me that, I was speechless. So we want to open it now to Q&A. Anyone want to ask a question to start off? Okay. I will go around this side. So just kind of help me pass the mic back, please, to whoever wants to ask.
Hi there. I was wondering, you said that the dragon maker had to be hospitalized. Why was that? What's the illness?
He's very, very old, and it's very, very hard work and very stressful. So it was a general stress-related injury, and he had to have a minor surgery.
Great presentation, Billy. When I met you through the bags that you made out of taxi upholstery, and I think you missed one, interesting part of it, where you had put red lining for Hong Kong Island taxis, green for Lantau, blue for New Territories, etc. And when I heard that, that's what turned it into the ultimate Hong Kong souvenir, right? So reached out, and it's created this sort of adventure of all the products that you've come along and made, including the one, I don't think you've mentioned, the kite winder. Maybe you could talk a bit about that?
Oh, yeah. Many years ago there was a very strong typhoon called Typhoon Vicente. It was signal 10, and it knocked down this huge tree in Causeway Bay. So my friends and I went and picked up some of this wood, and I'm very obsessed with basically making Hong Kong stories. And so we took this wood, brought it to this old sawmill in Apley Chow, which specializes in splitting planks to make boats, to make ships. And from there we thought it would be poetic, since the tree died as a result of wind action, if we would turn the wood from it into kite winders, like a handle for a kite. And so that's what we did. We thought it was just a very small, poignant, beautiful story that this tree, which we've seen so much, and had seen the neighborhood that it stood in for so many years change and develop, to sort of memorialize it in that way, and to respect and acknowledge that. Yeah. And as for the taxis, yes, a lot of thought was put into that. We basically inverted the taxi so that the seats were on the outside and the paint job would be on the inside. It goes more towards sort of like what is the subtle thing about Hong Kong culture, especially in the past 2 weeks, as we've seen, like with all these demonstrations. Like Hong Kong culture is definitely alive, and it definitely is a thing, and it's growing more and more clearly defined and well articulated. And I think that, like, basically we're finally asserting strongly that this is a distinct place with a distinct character, and we should be proud of it.
A really wonderful experience this whole morning. Can you elaborate a little on why they picked you to step into the Shady Band? Like, did you bring all the masters together? Like, did Bendigo not know who to go to in terms of where the craftsmen were, and you like aligned all of them and sourced for them? I'm just curious of what that process was.
Well, at that time, I was just a writer. Like, I was just writing, and I liked doing this sort of thing. I was doing profiles on all sorts of people, like a guy who makes traditional junks in Shao Kei Wan, like somebody who does like traditional puppetry. So this person at the newspaper who was translating all my work, he'd just done this piece on which I'd written on the Pok Fulam fire dragon. So it was he who thought that you would be appropriate to come do this. Like, at the very least, you'd be interested. So the people from Bendigo they didn't invite me at all. I just showed up, and just got to talking to them, and they were such lovely, inviting people who were so open-minded and obviously cared so deeply about this culture. That we just got along famously, and essentially from my point of view, like I was already getting what I wanted. I was writing my articles, I was being paid for that, but then like gradually as I was following them, because I had to be with them every time they came to Hong Kong, gradually I just became their translator, and that's how I grew from just writing about this and observing them to actually taking part in the process, liaising with all the makers, and then when they weren't in Hong Kong, like I would do the pickups and the bank transfers and transportation and that kind of thing.
Anyone else?
Hey Billy, that was an awesome presentation. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. I certainly learned a lot. What are you working on now? Like, what's your next big project? Where's your wonder leading you?
Well, I can't give specifics, but it will be. Oh, I hope this isn't jinxing it. It will be a cafe in a prominent location on the harbor front. It'll be branding for that. I really don't want to jinx it, but that's okay.
That's okay. You probably signed an NDA anyway.
Right.
Where would we how would we best follow you as an artist, a writer, or creative? Like, how do we stay in touch with what you're doing?
Well, most of my articles are on Zalima City Mag, and you'll find basically whatever you want to find out about that whole process of making the dragon there, and the ongoing adventures of said dragons. But like my website, handsomco.com, and also my Instagram, handsome.co. Yeah, I try to keep it kind of current. But of course, like, if you want to write to me, write to me. I'm very open to receiving messages. I love hearing back from people. Because the saddest thing actually is that I work alone, and so it's quite lonely sometimes. Like that is kind of the price you pay for doing this. Like you're quite out of touch with people a lot of the time. So I do love it when people write to me. Will do. Thank you.
That was an awesome presentation, thank you. Besides the dragon, I think the tram project was very interesting. Could you talk a little bit more about it and whether it is still ongoing and can we climb on one of those trams to enjoy your design?
Sure. Well, in answer to that, because of licensing difficulties and finagling, like it's a private club. But I can tell you that there are ways to get on. For instance, you could email me and yeah, but because the government is very cautious, they don't want to open the floodgates saying, oh, well, there is a tram with a toilet on it, so we're giving a restaurant license to that. They're afraid that somebody say, now I've got a truck and I put a porta potty in it, so give us a license too. So that's why it's that way. So that tram has now partnered with the Peninsula Group. So like they tend to put their people on there as a mixture of sort of like you get to see the tram depot plus you get to go on this, you have this experience. In terms of the experience of creating the tram, this happened last summer. It was incredibly stressful. Like the project got pushed back like several times, and because of the peculiarities of the tram, there's no set schematic for it. It's a quirk, because each one is done by hand, not according to plan. So the craftsmen know how to do it, but they're not willing to commit that to paper for job security reasons. And so we were having to make, like, I didn't do the measuring, but my partner, Jenny, who helped me, my business partner, Jenny, who helped me with this project, in fact, she was the main architect, she had to go in and take incredibly detailed measurements of this because it didn't matter what plans the tram company gave us, they would not be accurate. And as you can appreciate when it's in such a small space, like even being 1 or 2 centimeters off is disastrous. So it had to be incredibly precise. We sourced all the leather from Italy, but like much of the work was actually done in Hong Kong, except for the seat structures, which were made in a factory in China, which I actually had to go sleep in, to supervise and really crack the whip to make sure that they were doing it. And I don't know why, but we had all sorts of stupid arguments about, like, one of the kids said, like, that's not real leather, Of course it is. Look at your dog. Your dog basically wants to eat it. Of course it's real leather. But why are we talking about this? Yeah, so like all sorts of like weird quirks with this tram. It's also the widest tram on the road, and the transport department has very strict rules about how wide it can be. Because as you can imagine, if it's too wide, you might like snag someone and like drag them across the street. You might catch one of those guys who does the deliveries on a bike by the tram line. You might hit another tram as it makes a bend. And on top of that, it's also the heaviest tram there because it's got all this bankhead seating and it's got a water tank filled with water. And so that water tank was possibly the single most expensive piece because it had to be designed by my business partner Jenny, and it was a special water tank because it has all these bulwarks in it in order to slow the flow of the water going forward. Because as you can appreciate, the tram needs to brake sometimes, needs to stop, and is incredibly heavy, so the inertia forces at play huge. And then when you have like this huge tank of water just slosh forward, it would basically shove the entire tram forward. And like if we were stopping at a red light, just shove forward, it would like cross that line, hit someone, Yeah, like all sorts of considerations like that. Also, this tram, it can just about make it to Shao Ke Wan, but it's not advisable because there's a slight hill. And while it can go down, there's no guarantee, depending on how many people there are and how full it is at the time, that it can make it back up the hill. Yeah, so those are some things about this tram, which were the real considerations on top of the sort of aesthetics and the sort of surface detailing. I like to think of it as really, it's a piece of transport to move machinery, and then it just so happens people can sit around it.
Amazing work. Thank you.
Okay, maybe one last question. I saw this hand go first.
So you mentioned for the once the dragons get too old, they will coil them and burn them. So initially we don't have so many old ones in Hong Kong. Have you ever thought about kind of how we could potentially keep pieces or repurpose pieces so we have kind of some old pieces still? Because I think the tradition is that we burn them. Have you ever thought about that? Since you repurpose, for example, the old taxi leather, have you ever thought about either repurposing and kind of upcycling old dragons, or how we can more kind of keep the pieces, so keep part of it?
Certainly that's a great idea, and people have thought of it. I don't think that it's my place to do it. Like, I would certainly encourage it and document it, but you know, these masters who make these dragons are such consummate artists. Like, really, it should be them. They're doing this kind of thing. And I did hear one instance where the man from Pengchao who makes the futuristic dragons, he has kept sort of like bits and pieces of older dragons and other creatures around, and he's maybe considering creating a new dragon out of those old parts, but we don't know. Those details are very, very fuzzy, and it's not for me. It's not for me to say, and I don't think it's my rightful place to insert myself in that, because it's such a serious discipline.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Billy. Real quick, what's your email address? Just so I really want people to write to you.
Sure. It's BP, B for boy, P for Peter, at handsomeco.com. Yeah.
Okay. So thanks everyone for coming. Just want to wrap it up real quick. Happy Friday, and I encourage you to tap into your sense of wonder today. Maybe take a minute and just think about what is something that you can do to do that. And then also take another minute to just write Billy an email so that you'll get 100 and something emails from us this morning. So happy Friday and have a good weekend.